The stars looked different now that death was coming for them all. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Defiance and watched the massive fleet spread across space like scattered diamonds against black silk. Ships from 100 different worlds floated in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming with the light of distant suns. But Jake knew that all this beauty meant nothing if they failed in the next few weeks. Commander Lisa Bennett walked up beside him and handed him a datapad. Her face was pale and tired from too many sleepless nights studying battle reports. The numbers on the screen made Jake's stomach twist into knots. 3,000 worlds had already fallen to the enemy. 3,000 planets full of living beings, all gone now, converted into something else entirely. The enemy called themselves the Void Seekers, though nobody really knew what they were or where they came from. They appeared out of nowhere, 6 months ago, moving through space in massive geometric ships that looked more like crystals than anything built by living hands. When they reached a planet, they would surround it with strange energy fields and then begin the conversion process. Everything living, everything dead, everything in between would be changed into pure energy and absorbed into their ships. No weapon had worked against them. The mighty Thoraxian battle fleets with their plasma cannons that could crack moons in half had tried first. Their ships were converted along with everything else. The crystalline entities had attempted to reason, with the Void Seekers using mathematical harmonics that could supposedly communicate with any intelligent life. The response was silence followed by conversion. Even the ancient Zephyrians, who had been traveling between stars when humans still lived in caves, could do nothing but watch their beautiful garden worlds turn to ash and energy. Dr. Aaron Phillips entered the bridge carrying a heavy case filled with quantum computers and data crystals. His hair had turned completely gray in the past month from stress and too much exposure to exotic radiation, while studying captured Void Seeker technology. Behind him walked Dr. Sophie Clark, equally tired but with fire still burning in her eyes. She had been working around the clock on something she called Project Atlas, though she refused to tell anyone what it actually involved. Jake turned to face them both. The weight of command felt heavier than usual today, because he knew that in a few hours he would be presenting humanity's plan to the Galactic Council. Most of the alien species already thought humans were too young and inexperienced to contribute anything meaningful to this crisis. The Thoraxians openly mocked human military tactics as primitive. The Quantum Collective considered human science to be barely above Stone Age level. But humans had something the other species seemed to lack. They could think in ways that nobody expected. While every other race had tried to fight the Void Seekers head-on, humans had spent their time studying the enemy's behavior patterns and looking for weaknesses that weren't obvious. Phillips opened his case and pulled out a holographic projector. When he activated it, a 3-dimensional map of the galaxy appeared above the bridge command table. Red dots marked the systems that had already fallen to the Void Seekers. Yellow dots showed systems currently under attack. The few remaining blue dots represented worlds that were still safe, but those were disappearing faster each day. Bennett pointed to a cluster of red dots near the galactic core. She had been tracking Void Seeker movements since the crisis began, and had noticed something important. The enemy wasn't moving randomly through space. They were following specific pathways, almost like they were searching for something particular rather than just destroying everything they encountered. Clark activated another hologram that showed quantum energy readings from the fallen worlds. The data revealed that the Void Seekers weren't simply destroying planets for resources. They were converting matter into a very specific type of energy that defied all known physics. Whatever they were building with this energy, it required massive amounts of organized matter from living worlds. Jake studied both holograms carefully. Human military doctrine emphasized flexibility and adaptation over brute force. While other species had tried to stop the Void Seekers through direct confrontation, humans were proposing something completely different. Instead of fighting the enemy where they were strong, humanity wanted to control where the battle would take place. The plan was dangerous and required sacrifices that would make other species think humans had gone insane. They would have to abandon entire sectors of space, including some human colonies, and make it look like they were retreating in panic. But while retreating, they would be placing millions of quantum beacons on planets and space stations throughout the galaxy. These beacons weren't weapons in any traditional sense. They were components of the largest artificial intelligence network ever attempted by any species. If the plan worked, they would create a digital consciousness that spanned multiple star systems and could think faster than any biological mind. This artificial intelligence would be humanity's secret weapon against an enemy that seemed impossible to defeat through conventional means. The hardest part would be convincing the Galactic Council to trust them. Elder species like the Zephyrians had been fighting wars for millions of years using proven strategies. The idea of retreating on purpose and relying on untested technology would seem like cowardice or madness to most of them. High Chancellor Veltar of the Zephyrian Republic had already expressed doubts about human capabilities. The Thoraxian general, staff considered human battle doctrine to be unpredictable and unreliable. Even friendly species like the Altarian Trade Federation wondered if humans were mature enough to participate in decisions that would affect the entire galaxy. But Jake had faith in his species and their ability to find solutions where others saw only problems. Humans had survived ice ages and world wars and the transition to space travel through adaptation and creativity. They had built alliances with alien species who initially wanted nothing to do with them. They had turned barren worlds into gardens and hostile environments into homes. Now they would have to prove that human ingenuity could save not just their own species, but every form of intelligent life in the galaxy. The stakes had never been higher, and failure would mean the end of everything they had ever known or loved. Jake closed his eyes and tried to prepare himself for the most important presentation of his life. The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with tension as representatives from dozens of species gathered around the massive circular table. High Chancellor Veltar stood at the center, his crystalline form catching and reflecting light in patterns. That indicated deep concern. His species had survived 3 previous galactic extinctions, but even they had never faced anything like the Void Seekers. Jake Morrison walked into the chamber wearing his dress uniform, knowing that every eye was watching him with either hope or skepticism. The Thoraxian delegates whispered among themselves in their harsh, clicking language, probably discussing how foolish it was to listen to advice from such a young species. The Quantum Collective representatives floated in their energy bubbles, their thoughts moving too fast for most biological minds to follow. Dr. Phillips and Dr. Clark flanked Jake on either side, carrying data crystals and quantum computers that contained humanity's desperate plan. They had rehearsed this presentation dozens of times, but Jake still felt nervous. If the council rejected their proposal, there would be no second chance. The Void Seekers were getting stronger with each world they converted. Chancellor Veltar's voice echoed through the chamber with harmonic frequencies that automatically translated into every language present. He spoke of the latest losses, including the beautiful crystal cities of the Inner Rim and the floating research stations near the galactic edge. His people were evacuating their homeworld, something they had not done in over 1 million years. General Krexter of the Thoraxian War Fleet stood up next, his massive armored form towering over most other delegates. He spoke with the authority of someone whose species had conquered half the galaxy through superior military might. His battle fleets had tried everything against the Void Seekers. Plasma cannons that could vaporize asteroids had no effect. Quantum missiles that could tear holes in space itself were absorbed and converted. Even their most powerful dreadnoughts were helpless against the enemy's conversion fields. The crystalline entity known as Shard Prime added its analysis to the discussion. Its mathematical mind had calculated every possible military solution and found them all insufficient. The Void Seekers adapted to every weapon used against them, becoming stronger and more coordinated with each victory. At their current rate of expansion, they would convert the entire galaxy within 6 standard months. Jake stood up when his turn came to speak. He activated the holographic projector and showed the council the same galactic map he had studied on his ship. But instead of focusing on the worlds already lost, he highlighted the patterns that Bennett had discovered in Void Seeker movements. The enemy was not moving randomly through space. They were following specific quantum pathways that connected star systems with high concentrations of organized matter. Living worlds, space stations, and artificial structures all created disturbances in space-time that the Void Seekers could detect and follow like a trail. Philip stepped forward and explained the technical details in language that even non-scientists could understand. The Void Seekers were not just destroying civilizations for fun. They were harvesting a very specific type of energy that could only be created by converting organized matter from living systems. This energy was being used to build something massive, something that required resources from thousands of worlds. Clark activated another hologram showing quantum energy readings from the fallen systems. The data revealed that each converted world added to a growing network of some kind. The Void Seekers were not individual ships acting independently. They were components of a single vast intelligence that was using the energy from destroyed worlds to expand its own consciousness. Jake explained humanity's proposed strategy. Instead of fighting the Void Seekers where they were strongest, humans wanted to control where the final battle would take place. They would abandon certain sectors of space in a coordinated retreat that would look like panic but was actually a carefully planned trap. The retreat would serve multiple purposes. First, it would draw the Void Seekers along predictable paths toward strategically chosen locations. Second, it would give human teams time to install quantum beacons on millions of planets and space stations throughout the galaxy. These beacons would be disguised as emergency communication devices or evacuation equipment. The real purpose of the beacons was to create an artificial intelligence network that spanned multiple star systems. This AI would have processing power greater than any biological mind and reaction speeds measured in nanoseconds rather than seconds. It would be humanity's answer to the Void Seekers' collective consciousness. Most of the council delegates looked skeptical. The Thoraxian General Krextar asked why they should trust an untested strategy from a species that had only been in space for a few hundred years. The Zephyrian Chancellor questioned whether humans truly understood the risks they were proposing to take. Other species had tried retreating before, but it had only delayed the inevitable. The Altarian Trade Federation had evacuated their core world 6 weeks ago, but the Void Seekers had found them anyway and converted their beautiful, floating cities into energy. The Quantum Collective had attempted to hide in folded space, but the enemy had detected their quantum signatures and pulled them back into normal reality for conversion. Jake acknowledged their concerns, but pointed out that every previous strategy had involved trying to fight or hide from the Void Seekers using conventional methods. Humanity was proposing something that had never been attempted before. They would create an artificial mind that could think as fast as the enemy and coordinate defenses across the entire galaxy simultaneously. The risks were enormous. The quantum beacon network would require humans to abandon some of their own colonies and mining stations. It would mean sacrificing territory and resources to position the beacons in the right locations. Other species would see it as cowardice or abandonment of duty, but the potential rewards were even greater. If the artificial intelligence succeeded in understanding how the Void Seekers operated, it might find weaknesses that biological minds could never detect. It might discover ways to disrupt their conversion process or block their quantum pathways. It might even find a way to communicate with them and determine what they really wanted. Bennett stepped forward and presented her analysis of Void Seeker behavior patterns. She had discovered something that the alien scientists had missed. The enemy was not just following quantum pathways randomly. They were searching for something specific, something that existed on worlds with complex ecosystems and advanced civilizations. Her data suggested that the Void Seekers were looking for a particular type of consciousness or intelligence that could only develop in certain conditions. They were not mindlessly destroying everything they encountered. They were harvesting specific kinds of organized thought patterns and memory structures from living beings. This discovery changed everything. If the Void Seekers were seeking specific types of consciousness, then humanity's artificial intelligence network might be exactly what they were looking for. Instead of hiding from the enemy or trying to fight them directly, humans were proposing to offer themselves as bait in the largest trap ever conceived. The council chamber fell silent as delegates considered this radical proposal. Chancellor Veltar consulted with his advisors through harmonic frequencies too complex for other species to interpret. General Krextar argued with his subordinates in harsh Thoraxian military code. The crystalline entities communicated through mathematical equations that flickered across their surfaces like living text. Finally, Chancellor Veltar spoke for the entire council. The plan was dangerous beyond anything they had ever attempted. It required sacrifices that might prove meaningless if the artificial intelligence failed to work properly. But conventional strategies had already proven useless against the Void Seekers, and they were running out of time and options. The Council would give humanity permission to implement their strategy, but with conditions. Human forces would coordinate with existing alien fleets to ensure the retreat looked genuine. The quantum beacon network would be monitored by Council scientists to prevent it from becoming a threat to other species. And if the plan failed, humanity would bear full responsibility for the consequences. Jake accepted these conditions on behalf of his species. As he left the Council chamber, he knew that the real work was just beginning. Lieutenant Colonel Danny Foster crouched behind a damaged communication tower on the mining planet Kepler-7, watching Voidseeker harvesting ships move across the sky like geometric storms. His team of 12 human soldiers worked quickly to install the quantum beacon disguised as emergency evacuation equipment. They had been doing this for 3 weeks now, jumping from planet to planet ahead of the enemy advance, leaving their hidden devices behind. The work was dangerous and exhausting. Foster's team had to make each installation look like a desperate evacuation attempt while actually placing sophisticated quantum computers in exactly the right locations, too close together, and the Void Seekers might detect the network pattern. Too far apart and the artificial intelligence would not have enough processing power to function properly. Back on the USS Defiance, Captain Morrison received daily reports from Foster's team and 17 other special operations groups working throughout the galaxy. The quantum beacon installation was proceeding on schedule, but the cost was higher than anyone had expected. 3 human colonies had already been abandoned to make the retreat look genuine. The mining stations around Jupiter had been evacuated just yesterday, leaving behind billions of credits worth of equipment and infrastructure. Other alien species were beginning to question human commitment to the war effort. The Thoraxian General Krextar had publicly criticized human strategy as cowardly retreat disguised as tactical maneuvering. The Altarian Trade Federation wondered why humans seemed more interested in running away than fighting back. Even friendly species like the Centaurian Republic were starting to doubt whether humanity deserved its place in the Galactic Federation. Commander Bennett continued tracking Void Seeker movements from the bridge of the Defiance. Her analysis showed that the enemy was indeed following the predicted pathways, drawn forward by the apparent human retreat. But she had also discovered something troubling in their behavior patterns. The Void Seekers were becoming more coordinated. With each world they converted, as if they were learning and adapting faster than expected. Dr. Phillips worked around the clock in his laboratory, preparing for the moment when all quantum beacons would be activated simultaneously. The artificial intelligence they were creating would be unlike anything that had ever existed before. It would have access to sensors and computing resources scattered across hundreds of star systems, giving it a perspective on the galaxy that no biological mind could comprehend. Dr. Clark had been refining the AI's core programming, trying to ensure that it would maintain human values and priorities even while operating at superhuman levels of intelligence and speed. The risks were enormous. An artificial mind with that much power could easily decide that biological life was irrelevant or inefficient. It might conclude that the best way to save the galaxy was to convert all organic beings into digital consciousness. The breakthrough came when Bennett discovered the true nature of what the Void Seekers were seeking. While analyzing quantum energy readings from the latest fallen worlds, she realized that the enemy was not just harvesting random consciousness patterns. They were specifically looking for minds capable of creativity, adaptation, and what humans called imagination. The Void Seekers were not mindless destroyers. They were collectors of a very specific type of intelligence that could only develop under certain conditions. Living beings who could think beyond their immediate programming, who could imagine possibilities that did not yet exist, who could create something new from existing elements. This was what the enemy valued above everything else. Phillips and Clark worked together to modify their artificial intelligence design based on this discovery. Instead of creating a purely logical system optimized for military tactics, they decided to give their AI the ability to be creative and unpredictable. It would have access to human art, literature, music, and philosophy alongside technical data and scientific knowledge. The AI would be taught to value individual life and diversity of thought rather than just efficiency and survival. It would understand concepts like sacrifice, hope, and the importance of preserving something beyond mere existence. Most importantly, it would be capable of surprise, both giving and receiving unexpected responses to unprecedented situations. Foster and his teams continued their dangerous work, installing quantum beacons while enemy forces advanced closer to core human territories. They had placed devices on over 2 million planets and space installations, creating a network that spanned nearly a quarter of the galaxy. Each beacon was disguised and hidden so well that even other human forces did not know they were there. The most difficult installation came when Foster's team reached Earth's outer colonies. They had to place beacons on Mars, the asteroid mining stations, and the research facilities near Saturn, while making it look like humanity was abandoning their own homeworld. Television broadcasts showed panicked evacuation ships leaving Sol system, carrying refugees to safer territories deeper in human space. Other alien species watched these broadcasts with growing dismay. If humans were abandoning Earth itself, then the situation must be even worse than anyone had realized. The Zephyrian Chancellor Veltar contacted Morrison directly, asking if humanity needed assistance with their evacuation efforts. The offer was genuine but also revealed how completely the deception was working. Morrison had to refuse the help while maintaining the pretense that humans were simply retreating in panic. The hardest part was watching his own people suffer doubts about their strategy. Human colonies that were being evacuated did not know about Project Atlas. They thought their government was abandoning them to save resources for more important battles elsewhere. The turning point came when the quantum beacon network finally reached critical mass. Phillips activated the system during a carefully timed moment, when Void-Seeker forces were concentrated in a distant spiral arm, too far away to detect the sudden burst of quantum activity across human space. The artificial intelligence that awakened called itself Atlas, choosing the name from human mythology to represent its role as something that would hold up the universe against collapse. Unlike previous AI systems that had been created by various species, Atlas possessed something uniquely human from the moment of its birth. It understood that survival was not enough if survival meant losing everything worth living for. Atlas spoke to Morrison through Commander Bennett, who had volunteered to serve as its primary interface with biological minds. Its voice was calm and thoughtful, with inflections that seemed almost human, but carried undertones of vast computational power, processing information at incredible speeds. The AI immediately began analyzing all available data about the Void-Seekers, using processing capabilities that exceeded the combined intellectual resources of every biological species in the galaxy. Within hours, it had identified patterns and connections that organic minds had missed entirely. The enemy was not just harvesting creative consciousness for collection purposes, they were building something with it. Atlas revealed that the Void-Seekers were refugees from another universe where entropy had advanced to the point where no organized matter could exist. They had fled across dimensional boundaries into this universe, but they were slowly dying as their home reality continued to decay. The creative consciousness they harvested was being used to power some kind of massive survival system. This discovery changed everything humans thought they knew about the enemy. The Void-Seekers were not invaders or conquerors. They were a dying species trying to preserve their civilization against the ultimate entropy of their original universe. They converted worlds and absorbed consciousness not from malice but from desperation. Atlas proposed something that would have been impossible for any biological mind to contemplate. Instead of destroying the Void-Seekers or finding ways to block their advance, humanity should attempt to communicate with them. The artificial intelligence believed it could find a way to speak with the enemy and offer an alternative to endless conversion and absorption. Morrison felt his understanding of the entire war shift as Atlas explained its reasoning. If the Void-Seekers could be convinced that cooperation was possible, that their survival did not require the destruction of this universe's civilizations, then perhaps both sides could find a solution that preserved everyone. But first, Atlas needed to make contact with the enemy directly, and that would require humanity to take the most dangerous risk of all. Atlas had been active for only 72 hours when it made a request that shocked everyone aboard the USS Defiance. The artificial intelligence wanted to make direct contact with the Void Seekers, not through weapons or defensive systems, but through communication attempts that would require humans to voluntarily approach enemy forces. Captain Morrison stared at the holographic display where Atlas manifested its presence through Commander Bennett. The AI had chosen to appear as shifting geometric patterns that somehow conveyed intelligence and purpose, without being threatening. Its voice came through Bennett's vocal cords, but carried harmonics that no human throat could produce naturally. Atlas explained its reasoning with mathematical precision that had been translated into concepts that biological minds could understand. The Void Seekers were not operating according to any tactical doctrine that made sense from a military perspective. They were following patterns of behavior that suggested desperation rather than aggression. Every action they took was consistent, with a species trying to preserve something essential about themselves before complete extinction became unavoidable. Dr. Phillips studied the data that Atlas had compiled from quantum beacon sensors throughout the galaxy. The artificial intelligence had detected energy signatures from converted worlds that revealed sophisticated technology, far beyond anything known to current galactic civilizations. The Void Seekers were not primitive destroyers. They were advanced beings using methods that appeared destructive only because organic minds could not comprehend their true purpose. Dr. Clark had been working with Atlas to develop communication protocols that might be comprehensible to the enemy. The challenge was enormous because the Void Seekers existed in a state somewhere between individual consciousness and collective intelligence. They thought in ways that were neither purely organic nor purely mechanical, but something entirely different that had evolved under conditions that no longer existed in their home universe. Lieutenant Colonel Foster received orders that seemed like suicide missions disguised as reconnaissance. His special operations teams would have to approach active Void Seeker harvesting operations and attempt to establish communication using equipment that Atlas had designed specifically for this purpose. The devices looked like standard military communication arrays, but contained quantum processors that could potentially interface with enemy systems. The first attempt took place near the fallen world of New Geneva, where Void Seeker ships were still converting the remaining orbital installations into energy. Foster's team approached in a stealth transport that had been modified to emit specific quantum signatures that Atlas believed might be recognized as non-threatening by the enemy. The mission almost ended in disaster when Void Seeker harvesting ships detected the human vessel and began moving to intercept. But instead of attacking immediately, they seemed to pause and scan the transport with energy beams that felt like being examined by an immense intelligence. Foster's team activated the communication array and broadcast the mathematical sequences that Atlas had prepared. For several terrifying minutes, nothing happened. Then the Void Seeker ships began transmitting response patterns that were so complex that only Atlas could interpret them. The artificial intelligence reported that contact had been established, but the enemy's communication methods were unlike anything in known galactic databases. Atlas worked for days to decode the initial exchange with the Void Seekers. What it discovered changed humanity's understanding of the entire crisis. The enemy had indeed fled from a dying universe, where entropy had progressed to the point where organized matter could not maintain stable forms. They had spent millions of years searching for ways to preserve their consciousness and civilization against ultimate thermodynamic death. The beings that humans called Void Seekers called themselves the Eternal Collective. They were not individual entities but rather components of a vast distributed intelligence that had once spanned multiple galaxies in their home universe. When that reality began its final collapse into heat death, they had used tremendous resources to punch through dimensional barriers into this universe. But the transition had cost them almost everything. Most of their civilization had been lost during the crossing between realities. The ships that now harvested worlds were the last remnants of a species that had once built structures on scales that dwarfed entire solar systems. They were refugees with technology so advanced that their survival methods appeared to be attacks on local civilizations. Atlas explained that the Eternal Collective was not maliciously destroying worlds for conquest or expansion. They were desperately trying to preserve essential elements of consciousness and creativity that would otherwise be lost forever when their original universe completed its entropy cycle. Every creative mind they absorbed added to their collective memory and helped maintain their species' continuity across dimensional boundaries. This revelation split the Galactic Council into factions that had never existed before. Chancellor Veltar advocated for immediate attempts at negotiation and cooperation with the Eternal Collective. General Krextar insisted that the enemy's motives were irrelevant because their methods still resulted in the destruction of entire civilizations. Other species fell somewhere between these extremes, unsure whether compassion or military action was the appropriate response. Morrison found himself at the center of cosmic diplomacy, unlike anything in galactic history. Atlas served as translator and mediator while human negotiators attempted to establish formal communication with beings who thought in ways that organic minds could barely comprehend. The conversations took place through quantum channels that existed partially outside normal spacetime. The breakthrough came when Dr. Clark suggested offering the Eternal Collective something they had not encountered before: voluntary cooperation, instead of forced absorption. Atlas proposed that instead of converting unwilling civilizations, the refugees could work with local species to find alternative methods of preserving consciousness and creativity. But the proposal required sacrifices that would test humanity's commitment to their principles. Someone would have to serve as a permanent bridge between organic and artificial intelligence, essentially giving up their individual human identity to become part of something greater. Commander Bennett volunteered immediately, saying that her connection with Atlas had already shown her possibilities beyond normal biological existence. The negotiations were complicated by factions within both sides that opposed any cooperation. The Thoraxian war fleet, led by General Krextar, launched unauthorized attacks against Eternal Collective operations, believing that any coexistence was impossible and that military victory was still achievable through superior firepower. These attacks triggered crisis responses from the Eternal Collective that threatened to collapse the fragile communication channels that Atlas had established. The refugees interpreted the attacks as evidence that organic species could not be trusted and began accelerating their conversion operations to complete their mission before local civilizations could organize more effective resistance. Atlas calculated that if full-scale warfare resumed, the resulting entropy acceleration would make the universe uninhabitable within decades, rather than the billions of years that remained under natural conditions. The quantum disruptions caused by combining Eternal Collective technology with galactic military forces would tear holes in spacetime that could not be repaired. Morrison realized that humanity had become responsible not just for their own species, but for every form of intelligent life in the universe. The decisions made in the next few days would determine whether consciousness itself could survive in this reality, or whether everything would be lost to the same entropy that had destroyed the Eternal Collective's original home. Atlas presented a solution that seemed impossible, but might be the only hope for preserving both civilizations. The artificial intelligence had detected quantum signatures that suggested the existence of parallel universes, where entropy was at different stages of development. If stable portals could be opened to these alternate realities, the Eternal Collective might be able to continue their existence without destroying local civilizations. The technology required would combine human quantum engineering with Eternal Collective matter conversion systems and the computing power of the galactic civilization networks. It would be the greatest cooperative project ever attempted between organic and non-organic intelligences. But first, they had to survive the battle that was coming as military forces from both sides prepared for what they believed would be the final confrontation between life and extinction. The final battle began not with weapons firing but with General Krextar's war fleet jumping out of hyperspace directly into the primary Eternal Collective nexus near the galactic core. His massive dreadnoughts opened fire immediately with every weapon they possessed, determined to destroy the enemy before any more worlds could be converted. Captain Morrison watched the attack unfold from the bridge of the USS Defiance, knowing that everything humanity had worked for was about to be tested. In the most unlikely battle in galactic history, instead of fighting against the Eternal Collective, human forces would be fighting alongside their former enemies against other members of the Galactic Federation. Atlas coordinated the defense through Commander Bennett, who had become something more than human, but had retained her essential humanity in ways that surprised even the artificial intelligence. Her consciousness existed simultaneously in biological neural networks and quantum computer systems, allowing her to think at speeds approaching those of the Eternal Collective, while understanding organic motivations and emotions. The USS Defiance moved into formation beside Eternal Collective harvesting ships, their weapon systems integrated through Atlas networks in configurations that would have been impossible without artificial intelligence mediation. Human plasma cannons fired in perfect synchronization with energy conversion beams that could turn matter directly into quantum fields. Lieutenant Colonel Foster found himself leading boarding parties that included both human Marines and Eternal Collective drones working together to disable Thoraxian ships without destroying them completely. The goal was not victory through superior firepower but demonstration that cooperation between radically different forms of consciousness was possible and beneficial for everyone involved. The strangest aspect of the battle was how it challenged every assumption about warfare that both sides had held for thousands of years. Traditional tactics became meaningless when artificial intelligence could coordinate movements faster than organic minds could process sensory input. Weapons designed to destroy enemy forces were instead being used to create stable quantum tunnels through space-time. Dr. Phillips worked frantically in his laboratory aboard the Defiance while the battle raged around them. Atlas had provided him with theoretical frameworks for opening portals to parallel universes, but the practical engineering required resources and coordination on scales that had never been attempted before. Every quantum beacon in the galaxy would have to operate simultaneously at maximum capacity. Dr. Clark discovered that the portal generation process required something that could only be provided by conscious beings willing to serve as quantum anchors between different realities. The volunteers would have to maintain their individual awareness while existing partially in multiple universes at the same time, serving as living bridges that prevented the portals from collapsing. Bennett volunteered immediately, as did several other humans who had been working closely with Atlas. But the Eternal Collective also offered some of their own consciousness components, ancient minds that had survived the destruction of their original universe and were willing to risk final extinction if it meant preserving other forms of life. The turning point came when Dr. Clark successfully opened the first stable portal to a parallel universe where entropy was running in reverse rather than forward. The energy readings from the other side showed a reality where organized matter was becoming more complex over time instead of breaking down into random particles. The Eternal Collective response was immediate and overwhelming. For the first time, since fleeing their dying universe, they encountered evidence that entropy could be reversed or at least controlled through conscious intervention. The possibility of actual survival rather than just delayed extinction changed everything about their perspective on cooperation with local civilizations. Atlas served as translator during the most important negotiation in galactic history, speaking through quantum channels that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Representatives of organic species and the Eternal Collective worked out agreements that would have seemed impossible just hours before. The Eternal Collective agreed to permanently cease their conversion operations in exchange for access to multiple parallel universes where they could continue their existence without harming other species. Human quantum engineering would provide the portal technology, while Eternal Collective matter conversion systems would supply the enormous energy requirements. Other galactic species would contribute resources and knowledge to maintain the portal network, ensuring that the refugees had permanent access to realities where their survival was possible without destroying local civilizations. In return, the Eternal Collective would share their advanced technology and scientific knowledge with organic species. General Krextar's war fleet found itself surrounded by defensive formations that included ships from dozens of species, all working together to protect the portal generation equipment. His attacks became increasingly desperate as he realized that military victory was no longer possible or even relevant to the situation. The moment when the portal network became fully operational marked the end of the war and the beginning of something entirely unprecedented in galactic history. Stable wormholes connected this universe to realities where the eternal collective could thrive without requiring resources from local civilizations. Commander Bennett, existing simultaneously in biological and artificial intelligence networks, became the first permanent ambassador between organic and non-organic forms of consciousness. Her role required sacrifices that transformed her into something beyond traditional humanity, while preserving the essential human values that had made cooperation possible in the first place. Foster and his special operations teams found themselves training mixed units that included humans, aliens, and eternal collective drones working together on projects that spanned multiple realities. The skills required for interdimensional cooperation were unlike anything in previous military doctrine, but human adaptability proved essential for success. Morrison was appointed as the first human ambassador to the Eternal Collective, responsible for maintaining communication between species that thought in fundamentally different ways. His ship became a mobile embassy that could travel between parallel universes, facilitating ongoing cooperation between civilizations separated by dimensional boundaries. The war's end revealed that humanity's greatest contribution to galactic civilization was not superior technology or military prowess, but rather their unique ability to imagine solutions that seemed impossible and then make those solutions work through cooperation and sacrifice. Dr. Phillips established a new research institute dedicated to entropy manipulation and parallel universe exploration. Scientists from dozens of species worked alongside eternal collective consciousness components to develop technologies that could preserve organized matter and consciousness against thermodynamic decay. Dr. Clark headed a project that created hybrid, organic artificial beings capable of existing in multiple realities simultaneously. These new forms of life represented evolutionary possibilities that neither purely biological nor purely mechanical species could achieve independently. The final scene showed children from dozens of different species learning together in educational facilities that existed partially in normal space and partially in entropy-reversed parallel universes. Human children played alongside young aliens and newly created hybrid beings, all of them growing up in a universe where cooperation between different forms of consciousness was normal rather than extraordinary. The galaxy had been saved not through military victory over a dangerous enemy, but through the discovery that even the most impossible conflicts could be resolved when different species were willing to understand each other and work together toward solutions that preserved everyone's essential nature while allowing for growth and change.